"Don't drink that wine. It's poisoned." I told the Mafia boss and he just laughed. A short, cold, arrogant laugh, like his own life was nothing but a game to him. "You think I'm afraid of a little wine?" he sneered. Moments later, the servant who'd sampled the wine collapsed, dead as a doornail right there in front of everyone. The whole hall went silent as a tomb. Dante Romano's eyes slowly swung around to me, his gaze no longer filled with disdain, but with pure, cold suspicion. I met his stare head-on and whispered. I recognized its scent. The scent of the thing that once killed me. "Hey, if that hook grabbed you by the shirt front like it did me, every time I replay it in my head, grab your phone real quick. Like this video. Drop a comment about a time you saw something coming that nobody else did. And subscribe so we can keep sharing these real stories of standing up when the world knocks you down." Alright, let's get back to it. The grand hall in that fancy-schmancy restaurant felt like it shrank down to the size of a shoebox the second I knocked that glass right out of Dante's hand. Crystal shattered against the marble floor. Red wine splashed everywhere, looking for all the world like blood from a fresh wound. Everyone froze solid, forks suspended in midair, conversations cut off in mid-sentence. I stood there, my apron stained with wine, my hands shaking like leaves, but not from fear, not exactly. It was more from the weight of what I'd just done, the sheer audacity of it. His men, these big bruisers in tailored suits with bulges under their jackets where they kept their guns, jumped up like I just declared war on them. One of them grabbed my arm, squeezing so tight I could practically feel the bruise forming right away. "You got a death wish, girl?" he snarled, his breath hot and reeking of booze on my face. I bowed my head low, staring at the mess I'd made, the shards of glass glinting under the chandeliers. "I'm sorry. There's something wrong with that wine," I mumbled, my voice barely carrying over the murmurs that were starting to swell in the room. Dante just sat there at the head of the table, his dark eyes narrowing like a pair of knives. He was all sharp angles, high cheekbones, a jawline that could cut glass, and that suit hugging his broad shoulders like it was made for a king, which in his world it probably was. "You think I need a waitress to teach me how to drink?" His voice was pure ice, low and controlled, sending chills crawling right up my spine. The room erupted then, with laughter from some, shouts of anger from others. "Who does she think she is?" someone yelled. Another guy slapped the table hard. "Get her out of here." They forced me to my knees right there in the center of the hall, the cold stone biting right through my stockings. My heart was pounding like a drum solo, but I kept my gaze down, fingers digging into my palms so hard it hurt. A hand cracked across my cheek, a sharp sting that snapped my head to the side. I tasted blood in my mouth, but I didn't cry out, didn't beg for mercy. I just knelt there as they dragged me toward the back door like I was a piece of trash they were throwing out. The boss's world didn't tolerate defiance, especially not from a nobody waitress like me. I could feel every eye on me, judging, mocking. My modest black dress, the one I'd ironed that very morning in my tiny apartment, felt like rags now, something to be ashamed of. Who was I to touch his wine? In their eyes, I was nothing less than nothing. The dragging stopped abruptly when a low groan echoed from the servant's direction, his body convulsing one last time before going completely still. One of Dante's lieutenants, a burly guy with a nasty scar tattooed on his neck, dipped his own pinky into the puddle of spilled wine and licked it hesitantly, his face draining of color instantly. He staggered back, gagging and vomiting all over some guest's lapel, the expensive fabric ruined as the man shoved him away in disgust. Whispers turned to horrified shouts, chairs scraping against the floor as people recoiled from the table like it was on fire. Dante's fist clenched around his napkin, his knuckles turning white as bone, while I felt the guard's grip on my arm loosen just a fraction in confusion. Alicia, Dante's main squeeze, perched at his side with her perfectly manicured nails tapping nervously, shot me a venomous glare, her lips curling like I'd orchestrated the whole scene just to get attention. The air thickened with panic, every breath heavy with the realization that death had brushed their fingertips. But as they hauled me away, twisting my arm behind my back in a way that made me want to scream, I caught a glimpse of the servant they'd called over to taste the wine. He was one of the newer guys, kind of a nervous type, dipping a finger into the spilled wine and tasting it like he'd been ordered to do. His face went pale first, then twisted in agony. He clutched at his throat, his eyes bulging out of his head, and dropped like a stone, dead before he even hit the floor. Gasps rippled through the hall. I twisted my head just enough to see Dante staring, stunned into silence, his glass still half raised in his other hand. Our eyes locked again as they pulled me through the doors. Mine weren't wide with terror, though. They held something else, something knowing, and I knew he'd seen it. And in that split second, everything shifted. "Bring her to me." Dante's voice cut through the chaos, calm but commanding, every syllable ringing with authority. His men hesitated, exchanging confused looks, but they obeyed, of course. They shoved me into a small side room off the kitchen, the air thick with the smells of garlic and simmering sauce. I straightened my dress, wiped the blood from my lip with the back of my hand, and waited, my nerves stretched tight as a piano wire. Minutes later, the door swung open, and there he was, Dante Romano himself, flanked by two of his ever-present guards. Up close, he was even more intimidating. That cologne he wore sharp and expensive, mixing with the faint, metallic tang of fear that hung in the air. "How did you know?" he demanded, stepping closer, towering over me like a skyscraper. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry as dust. "I don't know who poisoned it, but I recognized its smell." The words hung there, simple and quiet, but heavy with meaning. His eyes searched mine, probing for any sign of a lie. I didn't flinch, just held his gaze steady, refusing to break eye contact. My hands were clasped tightly in front of me, trying to hide the fact that they were trembling. He circled me slowly, like a predator sizing up its prey. "A waitress who knows poison. That's no coincidence." I said nothing more, letting the silence speak for me. Outside, I could hear the distant wail of sirens, people scrambling to figure out what the hell was going on. But in here, it was just us, trapped in a tiny bubble of unspoken questions. Why me? How? He didn't know yet, not really. But that moment, that connection, planted the first seed of doubt in his mind about who I really was and what I was capable of. In the dim light of that side room, Dante snapped his fingers, and one of the guards thrust a vial under my nose. It contained the remnants of the wine, scraped up right off the floor. I inhaled sharply, my nostrils flaring as the acrid tang hit me, my body recoiling instinctively, like I'd touched a hot stove. My knees buckled slightly, and I gripped the edge of a nearby counter to steady myself, my nails scraping against the wood. Dante's brow furrowed, watching every twitch, every shallow breath I took. "That reaction. It's personal," he muttered, more to himself than to me. I nodded once, my jaw set, refusing to elaborate, even as beads of sweat popped out on my forehead. The guard yanked the vial away, but the scent lingered in the air, clinging to my clothes like a ghost. Dante's hand hovered near my shoulder, almost offering support. Then he dropped it back to his side, the first crack of uncertainty showing in the tightening of his jaw. Word spread fast after that night. The next day, headlines screamed about the assassination attempt on Dante Romano, the untouchable mafia boss who ruled the city from the shadows. But they twisted it, painting me as the villain in the story. Ezra Romano, Dante's younger brother, took charge of the investigation. He had that angelic face, all soft features and charming smiles, but his eyes were cold, calculating, like a shark's. He showed up at the restaurant with his entourage, demanding records, questioning the staff, throwing his weight around like he owned the place. When they pulled my file, that's when it all started to unravel. "Leia Moretti," he read aloud in the back office, smirking like he'd just won the lottery. "Worked 2 years ago in a rival family's chemical lab. Specialized in toxic substances. The media ate it up like candy. Waitress tried to poison Mafia boss, but failed. My face was everywhere. That timid, unflattering photo from my employee badge blown up on every news site, plastered across every screen in the city. Calls flooded in, threats, hate, Accusations. A constant barrage of negativity. I holed up in my cramped apartment. The walls so thin I could hear my neighbors arguing about the garbage. The fridge humming its lonely tune. The city outside roaring like a beast. But they didn't stop there, not by a long shot. That night, Dante's men burst into my apartment, guns drawn, zip-tying my hands behind my back and dragging me out to an abandoned warehouse down on the docks. The air reeked of salt and rust, the smell of decay hanging heavy in the air. They tied me to a metal chair, the cold metal biting right through my thin sweater. Buckets of icy water came next, splashing over me in waves, soaking my clothes, making me gasp and shiver uncontrollably. As the water dripped from my eyelashes, Ezra sauntered in with a tablet, shoving it right under my chin so I couldn't miss it. It showed grainy footage of me in that lab, mixing vials under harsh fluorescent lights. "Look at yourself, poison maker," he sneered, zooming in on my gloved hands like he was trying to find my soul there. My chest heaved, my breaths coming in ragged bursts, but I turned my face away, staring at a rusted pipe that was dripping steadily, drop by drop. The men around him chuckled, one of them flicking water from my hair like I was some kind of wet dog. Dante watched from the shadows, his arms crossed, his silence even louder than their taunts. Ezra leaned in close, his breath sour and hot as he whispered in my ear, "Confess, and maybe we'll make it quick." I spat a mouthful of water right at his shoes, the act deliberate, watching it soak into his polished leather. His face twisted in rage, his fist raised, but Dante's sharp voice stopped him cold. "Were you saving him or setting a trap?" One of the goons growled, his face inches from mine. I bit my lip hard, tasting blood again, the water dripping from my hair and into my eyes, blurring my vision. Dante entered the circle then, his presence sucking the oxygen right out of the room. He pulled up a chair directly opposite me, his legs spread wide, his elbows on his knees, staring at me like he could see straight through my soul, every dark corner of it. "If you lie to me," he said, his voice low and sharp as a blade, "you'll beg for death." I trembled, not just from the cold, but from the memories that were flooding back, unbidden. The sharp chemical burn on my skin, the screams echoing in that lab. But I said nothing at first, just met his eyes, letting the water pull at my feet. The silence stretched, heavy and thick with unspoken truths. Finally, I spoke, my voice surprisingly steady despite the chattering of my teeth. "Test me if you want, but I didn't do it." They left me there for hours, dripping and freezing, while they debated my fate. I could hear them outside, their angry voices, accusations flying back and forth. Ezra was pushing the hardest, of course. "She's a plant from the rivals. Kill her and be done with it." But Dante's voice cut through the noise. "No, she's coming with us." They untied me eventually, wrapping a scratchy blanket around my shivering shoulders, and loaded me into a black SUV. The city lights blurred past as we drove to one of his safe houses, a sprawling mansion on the outskirts of town. Inside, a maid handed me dry clothes, a soft sweater and jeans that actually fit. I changed in a bathroom that was bigger than my whole apartment, the steam from the shower fogging the mirror. When I came out, Dante was waiting for me, a glass of scotch in his hand. "Talk," he said simply, his gaze unwavering. I sat on the edge of a leather couch, my hands clasped in my lap, and let it all out, slow and steady, like water being poured from a bottle. "I was forced to test that poison 2 years ago." My fingers moved to the buttons of my blouse, undoing just enough to reveal the scars, jagged, puckered lines that ran across my collarbone and down my side. Souvenirs from needles and burns, chemical burns that still ached in the cold. I escaped the lab and I've been running ever since. False name, low profile, waitressing. Paid the bills. His face didn't change much, but his eyes darkened, reflecting the fear in mine, mirroring something in his own soul, a shared hatred for what I had endured, and that deep, intimate knowledge of death's sharp edge. He leaned forward, tracing one of the scars lightly with his finger, not quite touching my skin, but close enough for me to feel the heat radiating from him. Who ran that lab? I shook my head. It doesn't matter now. But it did matter to him more than I knew. Unbeknownst to me then, his own brother had funded it, lining his pockets with dirty money. Later that evening, as I wrapped myself in a robe by the fireplace, the flames dancing and casting shadows across my scars, Dante returned with a small, locked box. He set it on the coffee table with a soft thud, the key turning slowly in the lock. Inside lay a faded photograph, a younger version of me, standing beside a man with the same eyes, both wearing lab coats, looking almost happy. "Your father," he said flatly, sliding the photo across the table toward me. My fingers trembled as I picked it up, tracing his face, the photo crinkling slightly under my grip. A single tear escaped, splashing onto the image, but I wiped it away quickly, setting the photo down with deliberate care. Dante's gaze softened imperceptibly, his hand covering mine for a beat that lasted just a little too long. "He worked for me once briefly." The revelation hung in the air between us, unspoken connections weaving tighter, my shoulders squaring as I pushed the box back across the table toward him. "Then you know what they did to him." The days that followed turned into a fragile truce, a delicate dance between two wary souls. Dante kept me close, under his protection, he called it. The mansion became my world, grand rooms with fireplaces always crackling, guards stationed at every door, watching my every move. He'd watch me sometimes from across the dining table during meals, his fork pausing mid-bite as I pushed the food around my plate. My appetite vanished. We'd talk in snippets, about the city, the restaurant, nothing deep or meaningful. But there was a pull between us, unspoken, a silent acknowledgement of the connection we shared. One night, after a storm rattled the windows, he found me in the library, curled up with an old book on chemistry I'd pulled from the shelves, trying to lose myself in its pages. "You really know your poisons," he said, handing me a steaming mug of tea. I nodded, sipping it slowly, letting the warmth soothe my nerves. "Had to survive." His hand brushed mine, then lingered, the warmth spreading through me, cutting through the constant chill that seemed to have settled in my bones. It wasn't fireworks or grand gestures of romance, just quiet, understanding, respect, building like a slow burn. During a quiet breakfast, Alicia burst into the dining room unannounced, her high heels clicking against the marble floor like gunfire, a stack of glossy magazines tucked under her arm. She flung them across the table, the pages splaying open to photos of me serving tables at the restaurant, captioned with vicious barbs about the boss's gutter pet. Coffee sloshed from my cup as I studied the photos, my knuckles paling around the handle. She circled the table, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "How quaint, playing house with the help." Dante's fork clattered against his plate, but before he could speak, I stood slowly, gathering the magazines into a neat pile, then handed them back to her with a level stare that didn't waver. "Jealousy doesn't suit you," I said calmly. She snatched them from my hands, storming out of the room, but not before hissing, "You'll be back scrubbing floors soon enough." The door slammed shut, leaving a charged silence in the room, where Dante's approving nod met my unflinching posture. Ezra played his cards next, all smiles and false warmth, a wolf in sheep's clothing. He cornered me in the garden one afternoon, the sun filtering through the leaves, the birds chirping as if nothing was wrong, oblivious to the darkness that lurked beneath the surface. "Leia, you've been through hell. Let me help you redeem yourself," he said, his voice dripping honey. "Prepare the wine for the next party. Show everyone you're on our side." I hesitated, my stomach twisting into knots, but I nodded. What choice did I really have? The party was bigger than any I'd seen before. A mix of underworld types, socialites in glittering gowns, their laughter echoing off the vaulted ceilings. A few of the guests snickered as I poured their wine, their eyes filled with malice. "Let's hope she doesn't spill it again," one of them muttered loud enough for me to hear. I kept my head down, my hand steady as a surgeon's, pouring Dante's glass last. He raised it to me, a small nod of trust flickering in his dark eyes. As I poured the final drops into Dante's glass, A guest, a slick-haired investor with gaudy gold chains around his neck, grabbed my wrist mid-motion, twisting it until the decanter tilted dangerously. "Careful, darling. Wouldn't want another accident. Now would we?" He leered, his grip bruising my wrist as laughter erupted around us. Wine splashed onto the crisp white tablecloth, staining it like accusations. I yanked my wrist free, shaking it out, feeling the blood rush back to my fingertips, and continued pouring without a word. My eyes locked on the crystal decanter. Dante's gaze sharpened from across the table, his conversation halting mid-sentence as he watched the scene unfold. The investor released me with a mocking pat on my back, but the energy in the room had shifted, the laughter dying down. My hands were steady now, pouring defiance into every single drop. He took a sip of the wine, then another. Then his face contorted in agony, the glass crashing to the floor as he collapsed, clutching his chest. Chaos exploded, screams, tables overturning. A scene of pure pandemonium. "She poisoned him again!" someone yelled, pointing directly at me, their voice shrill with panic. Guards tackled me to the ground, their knees digging into my back, pinning me in place. "It wasn't me!" I screamed, struggling against their grip, tasting dirt from the expensive rug. Ezra knelt beside Dante, feigning shock and concern, while Alicia, his sleek ex-lover with sharp red lips and even sharper eyes, hovered nearby, whispering something I couldn't quite make out. The evidence was piling up against me, my fingerprints on the bottle, the same poison scent lingering in the air. They dragged me down to a cell in the basement, the iron bars clanging shut behind me, the sound echoing in the silence. I sank against the cold stone wall, burying my head in my hands, the weight of betrayal crushing me, suffocating me. How could this be happening again? I checked the wine myself in the dim basement cellar before the party, making sure it was safe. Hours blurred into a haze, the flickering fluorescent light overhead buzzing incessantly, until Ezra descended the stairs, a syringe glinting menacingly in his palm. He crouched down at the bars, injecting the contents of the syringe into a rat that scurried nearby, its beady eyes filled with fear. The creature seized up, foaming at the mouth before stiffening, its tiny body going completely limp. "Same stuff you used upstairs," he taunted, tossing the empty vial through the bars of the cell. It shattered at my feet, the shards of glass scattering across the floor, one slicing my bare ankle. Blood trickled out, warm against my skin, mixing with the grime on the floor as I pressed my back harder against the damp wall, my breaths coming in short, shallow gasps. His laughter echoed up the stairs, sending shivers down my spine. But then Dr. Hale appeared behind him, pulling him aside and whispering urgently in his ear. I watched them argue, Dr. Hale's face etched with worry, Ezra's dismissive wave cutting him off mid-sentence. The doctor's eyes flicked to me, a hint of sympathy, a warning, before they both vanished, leaving me alone with the dying rat's final twitches, its tiny death throes mirroring my own pounding pulse. Dante survived, thanks to Dr. Hale rushing in with his medical kit and taking charge of the situation. Dr. Hale was the family doctor, a man in his mid-40s with salt and pepper hair, always calm under pressure, especially skilled at covering up these kinds of messes. He pumped Dante's stomach right there on the floor amid the spilled caviar and broken heels, a surreal and grotesque scene. The lab analysis came back quickly. The wine had been switched. Security footage showed a 10-second gap expertly cut where the switch had been made. Only one person had access to override the system and tamper with the footage, Ezra. Dante, pale but furious, launched a secret probe from his sickbed, determined to uncover the truth. I stayed locked up in that cell, treated like an animal. Meals were slid through a slot in the door, the damp air seeping into my bones, chilling me to the core. But one night the door creaked open. Dante stood there, leaning against the frame, his eyes burning with a fire I couldn't quite decipher. "You're the only witness I trust," he said quietly, his voice low and rough. "No one touches her." He moved me to a more secure wing of the mansion, doubling the number of guards stationed outside my door. Our talks deepened, becoming more personal, more revealing. Then came the nights by the fire, him in a silk robe, me wrapped in a thick blanket, trying to ward off the cold. He'd share bits and pieces of his world with me. The empire he'd built on blood and loyalty. The constant knives at his back. The never-ending struggle for power. I'd listen, tracing my scars absent-mindedly, lost in thought, and he'd reach over, taking my hand in his. "You're stronger than they know," he'd murmur, his voice a low rumble. Tension built between us, electric, his thumb brushing against my wrist, my breath catching in my throat. One evening, after a close call with a sniper that had left us both shaken, he pulled me close, his lips crashing into mine, rough, desperate, tasting of whiskey and relief. It wasn't gentle romance. It was something raw and primal, born out of survival. Two broken souls recognizing each other in the darkness, finding solace in the shared trauma. One stormy night in the secure wing, Dante spread maps across a massive oak desk, red pins marking Ezra's suspected hideouts, locations where he might be hiding assets or planning his next move. I leaned over, pointing to a forgotten dockside warehouse that was circled in faded ink. "There. Hidden shipments," I said, my voice firm, recalling lab deliveries from years back, shipments of chemicals that had come through that very warehouse. His eyes lit up with surprise, then respect as he radioed orders immediately, dispatching his men to the location. Hours later, one of the guards burst into the room, breathless with excitement. "We found crates of the same poison, the manifest signed by ER." Dante's fist slammed down on the desk, splintering the wood, while I stepped back, my arms crossed, watching the fury build in his veins. He turned to me, his voice gravelly with emotion. "You just saved my operation." The maps lay crumpled on the desk, the taste of victory bittersweet amid the roaring thunder outside. But the underworld whispered, as it always did, fueled by jealousy and suspicion. "The boss is being controlled by a mere waitress," they murmured in hushed tones. Socialites at the next gathering, elegant women with diamonds dripping from their necks, cornered me in the powder room, their eyes filled with malice. "Did you really think he'd marry someone who used to wash glasses?" One of them sneered, her perfume cloying in the small space. "You're just a toy, until he tires of you." Laughter echoed off the marble sinks, bouncing off the walls like bullets. I adjusted my purse on my shoulder, meeting her eyes calmly, refusing to show any weakness. "Keep talking," I said, my voice low and steady. "See where it gets you." I walked out of the room, my head held high, but inside, it stung. Their words echoing in my mind, planting seeds of doubt. Dante stayed silent, publicly protecting me from any further exposure, but I mistook his silence for indifference, a lack of care. "Am I just a pawn in your revenge game?" I asked him one night, my voice cracking with emotion. He cupped my face in his hands, his touch surprisingly gentle. "No, but I can't risk losing you." Heartbroken, feeling like I was nothing more than his weakness, I slipped away at dawn, packing a small bag and climbing over the back wall of the estate, vanishing into the city mist. Freedom, or so I thought. While hiding out in a dingy motel on the city's edge, the rain lashing against the window, a knock rattled the thin door, jolting me awake. I froze, my hand reaching for the knife I kept hidden under my pillow, peering through the peephole. It was Dr. Hale, soaked to the bone, clutching a sealed envelope in his hand. He slid it under the door. "Run," the note inside read. "They're coming for you. Your blood work from the lab. It matches antidote traces only you could produce." Inside the envelope were lab reports detailing my unique immunity to the poison, stamped with Ezra's initials. I burned them in the sink, the flames reflecting in my determined eyes, then slipped out the fire escape as tires screeched to a halt below. Hale's car was idling at the end of the alley, waiting for me. I slid in silently, his nod confirming the alliance I'd never asked for, but desperately needed. Dante tore the city apart, searching for me, his fury knowing no bounds. Old records surfaced in his frantic search, dusty files from 15 years back, revealing secrets he'd never known. My father, Antonio Moretti, a low-level enforcer in his organization, had taken a bullet for a young Dante during an assassination attempt, saving his life. Later, Antonio had vanished, ending up as a test subject in those poison labs funded secretly by Ezra to develop new weapons against rival families. Dante pieced it all together, the years of deception and hidden agendas laid bare. I'd saved him twice, both times unknowingly fulfilling a debt he could never truly repay. At the next Mafia summit, the power brokers of the city crammed into a smoky back room, the air thick with tension and anticipation. Dante stood tall, his presence commanding. "From this day on, she's not a servant," he declared, his voice resonating with authority. "She's the one I owe, and the one I choose." Silence fell like a guillotine, cutting through the murmurs and whispers. Ezra's face paled, but he played it cool, hiding his fear beneath a mask of indifference. The final blow came swiftly, unexpectedly. Ezra's men snatched me off the street, blindfolding me and throwing me into a van that reeked of gasoline and fear. They tied me to a chair in an empty factory, the vast space echoing with emptiness. Ezra loomed over me, his angelic mask finally cracking, revealing the monster beneath. "Give up your empire, brother, or she dies," he hissed, his voice dripping with venom. Dante arrived alone, his hands raised in surrender, signing over ownership papers on a rickety table. But as Ezra gloated, confident in his victory, Dante nodded to his hidden sniper, waiting in the shadows. A shot rang out, the bullet meant for me, crumpling me in the chair, blood blooming on my chest. Ezra laughed maniacally, his eyes filled with triumph. "You lost everything for a servant," he sneered, his voice laced with contempt. Dante's gun flashed, bullets ripping into his brother's body. The look of triumph replaced by shock as he slumped to the ground, lifeless. Dante rushed to me, cradling my head in his arms, tears streaking his face for the first time I'd ever seen. "Leia, no," he whispered, his voice filled with anguish. The world collapsed for him in that moment. The funeral was a somber affair, the black suits blending into the rain-soaked landscape, the rain pattering on the casket, a mournful dirge. Dante was broken, a titan humbled by grief and loss. In the factory's aftermath, as Dante knelt beside my body, Ezra's phone buzzed incessantly on the floor, taunting him even in death. Dante snatched it up, scrolling through the texts, coordinates to a rival clan's vault, promises of alliance if he fell. His face hardened, his jaw clenched, as he pocketed the phone, knowing it could be useful leverage. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Dr. Hale knelt beside him, pressing 2 fingers discreetly to my neck. "She's gone, boss," he said quietly. "We need to move." Dante nodded numbly, lifting me gently in his arms, my head lolling against his chest, fake blood smearing his shirt, staining it crimson. Ezra's lifeless eyes stared accusingly, but Dante kicked the corpse aside, carrying me out into the night, his grief fueling his resolve to dismantle every trace of betrayal, to avenge my death and destroy all those who had wronged us. But shadows shifted 2 nights later, secrets whispered in the darkness. Dante, hollow-eyed and consumed by grief, was sitting alone in his study when he found Dr. Hale's note tucked inside a file, hidden in plain sight. Bullet was non-lethal, sedative round. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. I emerged from the darkness, alive, bandaged, but standing on my own 2 feet. I had to die so you could be alive. I'd struck that bargain with Hale ages ago, having mapped out the whole charade to force Ezra to reveal his intentions. That unassuming waitress had masterminded everything, navigating a life-or-death situation like a seasoned player. Dante just stood there, utterly speechless. Then he grabbed my hand and squeezed it tight, pulling me in close. "From this moment forward, you're not just my waitress. You're my equal now." We were standing there amidst the crumbling remnants of the empire, yet we were unbreakable. As the sun began to rise, and we stood on the mansion balcony overlooking the cityscape, the wind playfully whipping our hair, Dante gave me a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, the initials of my father intertwined with his own etched into the metal. "This isn't a proposal. It's a vow," he said, as he slipped the ring onto my finger. It was a perfect fit, the cool metal immediately warming against my skin. I gave it a little twist, feeling the weight settle into place, and then I leaned into his side as we watched the sun crawl over the skyline, a skyline that we both almost lost. His arm encircled me, a strong, unwavering embrace. No words were necessary. The city below seemed to bow to our shared silence, signaling the dawn of a new era. "You have been there, haven't you? Invisible, underestimated, your quiet strength mistakenly perceived as weakness. But it was never insignificant. Carried you through the flames, transformed poison into your power. You rose not with a loud crash, but with the constant, steady rhythm of your own heart. Where are you watching from now?